Let me look at it just a second before I... Hold on. It's in verse... Let me look here just a second. Yeah, it's just a wild man. The word ass is not there. That's editorial additions that come into your translations all the time. Why should we be surprised? Yeah, it just says a wild man. It never says wild ass of a man. There's no word for donkey there in the text. This is the kind of thing you have to be careful of when you're looking at translations. Oftentimes they'll slip in a few words here, a few words there. Just got to be careful. It happens. Not unusual. Just says he'll be a wild man. Doesn't say he'll be wild donkey or wild ass. So it doesn't use that terminology. Just be careful. Okay. Let me do a little bit of review to get us up to speed. Gan Eden, Garden of Eden, is a tabernacle. It was meant to be viewed as a place where God would come and would dwell with man in holy space and in holy time. We must get out of the mindset that Genesis 1 and 2 is dealing primarily with material creation. It's really dealing with this idea that God came to give us holy space and holy time. That's the real purpose of it as you're reading it, coming from the language and the culture of the people who first read it. We have come to Genesis 1 and 2 with all kinds of issues based on our Darwinian evolutionary issues and concerns. And we've said, oh, please, Genesis 1 and 2, help us to fight evolution. And the people who were initially reading Genesis 1 and 2 would have looked at you and said, who's Darwin and what's evolution? We don't have any idea what you're talking about. So it was not written for those or for that issue. What it is written for is we have in the heavenly realms the Elohim. And there is Ha Elohim, the God. And he is going to give these other Elohim, he is going to give them power to rule certain parts of the universe. He's also going to give them choice. And they are going to use that choice, some of them to rebel, and some of them to be obedient. God is then going to use the ones who are obedient. They will create for him an army, and he will then be known as Adonai Tsavaot. We call it Lord of Hosts. That sounds really cool, but it means Lord of Armies. He is going to have a chariot army. He is going to weaponize and mechanize this army. Since they're in chariots, they can move. They can go to anywhere that the people of God need protection. And they have flaming swords. Because this throne room of God, this chariot throne room of God that moves around, has fire all around it. So we know it as the pillar of fire by night and the cloud by day. That's this chariot throne of God that moves around with his people. And he protects them. And in fact, this all happened before we ever got to Genesis 1, because in Genesis chapter 3, when man and woman are driven from Gan Eden, God places a cherub there with a flaming sword in his hand. So there are these divine ones, these Elohim. They live outside of the earth-space continuum. Now, they can come into the earth-space continuum, and in fact, I believe that they did. We know that they did. They come and they want to create, those who rebel, they want to create problems. Before we ever got to Genesis 1, there was a cosmic battle going on. between the forces of evil and the forces of good. God apportioned parts of the world to these Elohim. You need to see this text. Go with me to Deuteronomy chapter 32. Deuteronomy chapter 32. Here's the basis for what I'm saying. Just this part of it. This gives you, encapsulates what I'm talking about. Deuteronomy chapter 32 and verse 8. He's known, because he sits elevated, Ha Elohim, he's also known as either Elyon or El Elyon, God or God Most High, because he sits elevated above them. And he sits in what we call the divine council. There are times when God calls a meeting of the Elohim, and he presides in judgment over these other Elohim, these other spirit beings. We have given these spirit beings names. Later on in Scripture, we call them cherubim, seraphim, burning ones, and later on, demons. Those are the ones who fall, those who rebel. Deuteronomy 32:8 says, when the Most High divided their inheritance to the nations, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set the boundaries of the peoples according to the number of the, and most of your translations are going to say, children of Israel. But the Septuagint and the Masoretic and the Dead Sea Scrolls say, according to the Bnei Elohim, the sons of God. Huh? Sons of God. Because the two earliest translations we have, the Septuagint and the Dead Sea Scrolls, say, according to the Bnei Elohim. Okay? Who are these Bnei Elohim? The Bnei Elohim are the sons of God that sit in this divine council. You are familiar with this divine council from a parallel text to the time period of Genesis 12. The book of Job was written during the same time period as Abraham. Job and Abraham are contemporaries. When we go to the beginning of Job chapter 1, we have this divine council, and Satan, who means the adversary, comes. He's the prosecuting attorney at this council. And he brings up people's names for consideration. And in this particular divine council meeting that we're given a little peek into, he says, I want to bring accusation against Job. I'm not sure that he's righteous for all the right reasons. I think if we were to mess with him a little bit, he would probably cave. God says, okay, you can do a little bit to him. Again, he sits ahead of this council, so he gets to call the shots, so to speak, even though the divine adversary has made his accusation. Go to Job, do whatever you need to do to him. Come back to me, tell me what you think. Comes back and says, well, I wasn't allowed to do everything to him because it turns out you have this protection around him. You got this thing, this hedge around him, and I really can't get to him the way I'd like to. He says, well, okay, you can go back and I'll remove the hedge a little bit. You can touch his body, but you can't kill him. So here's this divine council where they're meeting and they're discussing what goes on with people in the world. And each of these Elohim, these Bnei Elohim, are given district areas of the world that they get to govern. And so the thinking of those who are living in the ancient Near East is that the gods are territorial. The Elohim, and they go by different names, Baal, Chemosh, all these different regions have a different god that governs their region. Some fallen, some not so fallen. Now what happens? You have these gods that are in charge, and the people begin to think in terms of territory. Israel, in her worldview, and the nations that surround her, thought in terms of the gods being in control of their area. If you go outside of your land, or where that god governs, you can't really be sure that you're going to be protected by the God you left. even if that was your native land. Here's an example of that. 2 Kings chapter 5. Naaman from Syria comes to Israel to receive healing for Zera'at. He wants to be healed. He goes and asks for healing from the prophet. The prophet says, go dip 7 times in the Jordan. He does. He comes back healed. He comes back to the prophet and he says, I want to worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but I got to go back to my land. And how am I going to do that? So he says, thinking territorially, the gods are territorial, I'll take 2 mule loads of earth from Israel and I'll bring them over to Syria. And then what I can do is I can dump out this dirt in Syria and I can stand on this dirt that's from Israel. And if I stand on this dirt that's from Israel, I can worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's nutty, but it's the way that they thought. And the prophet says, go in peace. He doesn't even try to correct him. He's like, you know what? If I try to correct this guy's worldview on this, we're going to be here a long, long time. Israel had the same view. You only have to go back a few chapters. They pushed the Moabite army all the way back into Moab. They had besieged the city in Moab. And then the king of Syria, the king of Moab, sacrifices the crown prince on the wall, sacrifices the crown prince, and the army of Israel goes, you know what? They just sacrificed to their God. And we're in their God's territory. We better get out of here. And they run because of this view that the gods are territorial. But lest we think that these Elohim will not be judged, Psalm 82. Psalm 82. Says, God stands in the congregation of the mighty. He judges among the Elohim. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Defend the poor and fatherless. Do justice to the afflicted and needy. Deliver the poor and needy from the hand of the wicked. Then he goes down to verse 6. I said, you are Elohim, and you are children of the Most High, El Elyon, but you shall die like men and fall like one of the princes. He judges these Elohim who have rebelled against him. And he says, you will die like men. My point is this, as we look at Genesis 1, 2, and 3, we're coming at this because we have this cosmic battle that's going on. God creates mankind and then makes the earth functional so that man can dwell in it. It's going to be good so that man can work with it. God is going to create another race. Beyond the B'nai Elohim, he's going to create Adam, humanity. And he's going to do the same thing with humanity that he did with the Elohim. That is, he wants them to govern their areas, but he also gives them the ability to choose whether they will be obedient or not. And once again, he creates this tabernacle, this holy space, and holy time. If you look at Genesis 1 and 2, you can see that Gan Eden and the later tabernacle are paralleled with each other. Because this is what you do. As a king in the ancient Near East, you come to your people, but you come to the tabernacle. You come where there is sacred space and sacred time. And God wants to dwell with his people. That's the purpose for creating this. But mankind, Adam and Hava, they rebel. So he has to drive them out. Now, long before he gave them the choice as to whether they would be obedient, he puts this plan into place. There is going to be an Elohim that will come through the line of mankind and bring redemption to this people, so that they will be able to, once they die, live forever. If they put their faith in him. If they're willing to be obedient to him. One will come from this realm of the Elohim. Now, here's what happens though. Those who have rebelled, those Elohim who have rebelled against God, when they realize that these others are created by him, this other race, they want to destroy this race. They don't want to see humanity survive. They want to infiltrate and destroy this race. Because there is going to be a righteous seed, a righteous descendant from this people. Although we don't know what people yet, till we get to chapter 12 today. There's going to be a people that will carry the descendants of this Mashiach, this one who is coming, who will redeem his people. So, they want to bring about destruction. The demonic forces of the world are all about destruction. That's what they want to do. They want to destroy. If you look at the apostolic scriptures, it becomes quite plain that they want to lead every person that they come in contact with to their ultimate demise. They're all about death. Which is why I find, personally, and this is my own personal issues, I find All Hallows Eve to be so problematic because if you think about it, All Hallows Eve is really all about death. It's all about the glorification of death. So trying to redeem that one, I think, seems a little bit far-fetched. I mean, you got these jack-o'-lanterns that are designed to drive off evil spirits. Well, what? Okay, really? Bones and skeletons. I mean, jack-o'-lantern, ghouls and goblins. I mean, this fascination with the spiritual world, but in the sense that it's about elevating death to a place of glorification. Death is the antithesis to who God is. We were not designed to die in that sense. He wanted us to live forever with him. Death becomes antithetical to him. And yet the conundrum of that is that God must die if he's going to come to this realm and take on humanity. Now, I'll stop there for a second. Questions or comments? Right, this is why you have to have a new nature. Okay, because the old nature wants to rebel against God. The old nature wants to move you to death. So you have to have the Spirit of God come live in you that will then allow you to live a life towards him that leads to eternal life. If not, without that, you have no capacity to eternal life. Without the Spirit of God coming to live inside of you. Yes. Yeah, I think that that's in it's in one of the synoptic gospels. Matthew, is it Matthew? Okay. Yeah, I think that he says that I think the way it reads is that the potential is there for the elect to be, because the lie is so convincing. I'd have to go back and read it, but I think he's talking about at least there's that potential because of this. The lie that's going to be told is absolutely convincing. That even if it were possible, the elect would be drawn away. I don't think they are drawn away, but I think he says, I'd have to go back and read it, but I think he at least opens the door that's a possibility because of this delusion and this. Yeah. Right, if the days were not shortened. Yeah, if the days were not shortened, even though. Now, remember what I said about the divine council. I mentioned this one before, and I'll just go back over just for a second. We have one of those occasions where I think we have divine council language in the book of Luke. Go with me to Luke chapter 22. Just one vignette on this, and we'll go back to Genesis chapter 11. Luke chapter 22. This is Yeshua speaking to Shimon, to Petros. If you have the divine council language in your head, if you're thinking in terms of God standing with these other Elohim, he says in verse 31, Luke 22, verse 31. Up until recently, I had not put this together. He says, and the Lord said, Shimon, Shimon, indeed, Satan has asked for you, that he may sift you as wheat. Well, that goes back to what we had in Job chapter 1. Remember what I said? Satan, as the prosecutor, comes and he says, I'd like to go mess with Shimon. Can I have an opportunity to mess with Shimon? And here's what he says. But he said to him, but I have prayed for you that your faith should not fail. And when you have returned to me, strengthen your brethren. Okay? So he said, Peter, now I don't know when in time this divine council meeting took place. Whether it took place before Yeshua came to this earth or after he came and he went back for a divine council meeting. But bottom line is, Yeshua was at a divine council meeting in which the discussion came up about Peter. This goes back to our thinking about Job, okay, putting the two together. And he said, Satan said, I'd like to mess with Job, I'd like to mess with Peter. I'd like to test him. And he said, I prayed for you, and I pray that you're going to be strengthened, and when you're tested, come back. Okay? Fascinating little interplay there. I think Yeshua is playing on I think if we're understanding it from the text, it's this notion of the divine council, that he's been in the presence of this divine council, sitting as El Elyon, God Most High. Now, go with me to chapter 11 of Genesis. This is the backdrop for what we're... Now, the point is that there is a coming promised seed. But we don't know yet what family that seed is going to be in. Yeah.
Can we go back to Job for a minute?
Sure.
God said you cannot kill Job.
Right.
But he destroyed his whole family.
Right.
I don't understand.
Well, yeah, he's allowed to bring extreme grief to Job by destroying all his sons and daughters at that point at the beginning of Job.
I think it's a resurrection image. Well, I don't dig it.
No, that's...
Okay, because he gets double portion at the end.
Yes.
And the only one that's double portion, and obviously you count the camels and all that, that's all double. But he gets the same amount of kids.
Right.
So the only one that's double portion is that he gets down back.
Right, if they're resurrected. Right. So there's...
That puts it in the context that somehow he has to be fair according to what we know versus just being able to
Yeah.
have mercy on who I want.
Exactly. Yeah, we need to get something straight. Here's a term, here's a sentence for you. God doesn't have to be fair. According to our view of fair. Okay? If he were fair, none of us would be here today. Because he'd hit the smite button on all of us. Just go, right? We'd all be dead. You know, God has a smite button for everybody, and so, you know, as soon as he hits the smite button, I mean, nobody can measure up to his standard of righteousness and holiness. So the first transgression, he hit the smite button, we'd all be gone, and he'd be just in doing that. Because once he hits the smite button on everybody, who's there to complain? Who's going to be there to voice the complaint and say, that was not fair? If everybody's gone, there's nobody to complain. So, you know, where does that get us? So, by our definition of fair, he doesn't have to be fair. We should get past that at some point. He's just, no matter what he does. He's just. That's different. And who can bring an accusation against him? Anybody want to stand up and say, well, I don't think that was fair? Really? If I gave you what you deserved, really? Okay. Chapter 11. Verse 1 says, now the whole earth had one language and one speech. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. Then they said to one another, come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly. They had brick for stone, and they had asphalt for mortar. And they said, come, let us build a tower and a city, or a city and a tower, whose top is in the heavens. And let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered over the face of the whole earth. So they're going to build, let me get this straight. They're going to build a tower that they think will reach into the heavens, they will have unimpeded access to the throne room of God, if I'm reading this the way it sounds. Now, you have to understand something. The pyramids, the ziggurats, these were thought of as sacred mountains. And every time a person wants to go and meet God, if you really want to meet God, you go up on a mountain, because that's where he meets with his people. That's the closest place between heaven and earth. And remember what we said, ancient Near Eastern cosmology. The mountains are on the edge of the water. That's the one thing the ancients figured out. They figured out, hey, look, if you're ever near water, there's a lot of mountains. And those mountains, they sink way down into the sea, and they become the pillars, and the mountains hold up this dome. So if you really want to meet God, you have to go to one of these places, one of these pillars. So what is he going to say? Hey, Moses, come up on Mount Sinai. Hey, everything's about coming up to a mountain, because that's the closest you can get to heaven, the throne room of God, okay? That for mankind. So here in chapter 11, they say, we're going to make, look what they say, we're going to make a name for ourselves, a reputation. We're going to build a tower so big because we want to have unimpeded access to the throne room of God. We want to be able to march in anytime we want to. Okay, well, skip down now. And remember what I said. This is all going to be about following the seed. You have an interesting verse, and anytime you have this kind of repetition in the Torah, you want to put a little star there, make note of it, because it's one of those important verses. Important verse number is verse number 30 in chapter 11. Now listen to this. Now Sarah was barren. She had no children. Duh. If you're barren, I think that means you have no children. Okay? That's like saying he was blind and he couldn't see. Well, blind means you can't see. So why do we, whenever the scriptures do this kind of repetition, it's one of those places that says, stop, I'm not doing this for the sake of repetition, I'm making a point here. Sarah is barren and had no child. What child are we talking about? The promised seed. There's no promised seed. But we've been promised that there is this one coming. Now chapter 12, verse 1. Now the Lord said to Avram, get out of your country and from your family and from your father's house to the land I will show you. And I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great. They had wanted to make themselves their name great. He says, no, that's not going to happen. He confounds the languages and they're dispersed. He says, I'll make your name great, Avram. I'm going to bless those. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in you, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. There's something about what's going to happen to Abraham that has universal ramifications. There's a universal aspect to this. Those who bless Abraham will be blessed. Those who curse Abraham will be cursed. His people and his land. You only have to look at world history to know that those who mess with Israel and the people of Israel, not good things happen. It's not, you can't mess with God's children and expect him as a father not to come after you. It does no good for anyone to poke their finger in the eye of God. And to mess with one's children is a real bad move. Nations that have come against Israel and kings that have come against Israel have found themselves at the mercy of his judgment. He says right here, I'm going to choose this man, Avram, from Ur of the Chaldees. He's from Babylon. I'm going to bring him down, and he's going to come down to the ancient Near East even further, and I'm going to put him in this land, at the crossroads of the world. This is where everybody comes through. Abraham, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to give you descendants. I'm going to give you land. Those who bless you, I'll bless. Those who curse you, I'll curse. And in you, all the families of the earth are going to find blessing. Wow. That's the first stage of this. Then you skip over a little bit, and Abraham puts the promised seed. Remember what I said? It's about the seed. Abraham puts, of all things, the promised seed at risk. Just after he's gotten this promise. Verse 10. Now there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to dwell there. For the famine was severe in the land. And he says to Sarah, hey, tell him you're my sister. And so she passes herself off as his sister. Verse 17. But the Lord plagued Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. And Pharaoh called Abram and said, what is this you have done? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister? I might have taken her as my wife. Now therefore, here is your wife. Take her and go your way. And Abraham gets his socks blessed off. He ends up with all kinds of stuff from Pharaoh. I mean, he gets all kinds of livestock. He gets all kinds of stuff. What's this about? And he's trying to pass off his wife as his sister. What if the promised seed is supposed to come through Sarai, and this Pharaoh has relations with her, we're messing with the line of the Messiah. So he just shuts down the ability of the Egyptians to have children. Pharaoh's not allowed to touch her. And Abraham comes away with his socks blessed off. Oh, well, there's a problem though. Sometimes in getting blessed, you may get something you really didn't bargain for. He not only gets all the stuff, he gets a few people. And in fact, he's going to get a girl named, here's her name, Hagar. We call her Hagar. It's Hagar, the foreigner. She's just known as the foreigner. We think Hagar is a proper name. So it just means the foreigner. He gets her in Egypt. Hold on to that. Okay, now go back with me. Genesis chapter 13. All right. Then Abraham went up from Egypt, he and his wife, and all that he had, and Lot with him. Oh, there's a problem. Well, partial obedience is not acceptable. Let me say that again. Partial obedience to God is not acceptable. If you just say, well, I'm going to be obedient to God, but, I may fudge a little bit. I may not be completely obedient. I'm willing to do part of what he wants. I'm just not sure I'm willing to do all that he wants. What had he been told? Get out from your kindred and your people. Leave them all behind. But he takes Lot with him. He was supposed to leave Lot behind. Chapter 13, he says, now look at this, verse 2, what I said. Abraham was very rich in livestock, in silver, and in gold. Verse 8, there becomes strife between Lot and Abraham because they become so wealthy. Sometimes wealth has its problems. They got so much livestock, they need to have all the area to graze them. Abram says to Lot, you go wherever you want to go, you pick wherever you want to go, I'll go the other way. Lot lifts up his eyes and says, I like the well-watered plains of Sodom and Gomorrah. Sodom and Gomorrah looks like a wonderful place. Well, not so much. Turns out Sodom and Gomorrah is going to be a real problem. Things aren't always what they seem. Just because you see with your physical eyes doesn't mean you're looking with spiritual eyes. Lot looks with physical eyes and says, well, that's a great place to raise my sheep and my cattle. But he's going to put his family in jeopardy by moving to Sodom and Gomorrah. Abraham, however, takes the opposite direction, and God continues to bless him. Look what he says, verse 14 of chapter 13. And the Lord said to Abraham, after Lot had separated from him, lift your eyes now and look from the place where you are, northward, southward, eastward, and westward. For all the land which you see I give to you and your descendants forever. And I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth, so that if a man could number the dust of the earth, then your descendants also could be numbered. Arise, walk in the land through its length and its width, for I give it to you. Okay, well, there we go. I'm going to bless your socks off, Abraham. You're going to have numerous children, numerous descendants. Well, the only problem is Abraham's getting older and older, and doesn't seem to be happening. Chapter 14 is Abraham going and rescuing Lot from captivity. And again, look at verse 18 of chapter 14. Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was the priest of God Most High. And he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. And he gave him a tenth of all. So Abraham gives this Melchizedek, a priest of Salem, a tenth of the spoils of war that he's taken in the defeat of Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, think with me what the apostolic writer says. There's Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and from Jacob we have all of these 12 sons, and one of those sons was Levi. And Levi, it says, because he's in the loins, he's in the genetic seed of Abraham, he also pays tithes to Melchizedek. And yet Levi is going to be the progenitor of the Aaronic priesthood, who that the tenth is supposed to be paid to. And yet there's one greater than even Aaron, because his great-great-great-grandfather paid tithe to this Melchizedek, king of righteousness, prince of Salem, who appears out of nowhere. And by the way, the intertestamental literature went berserko with Melchizedek. They loved him because there was so little said about him, and so the intertestamental literature has all kinds of things to say about him. He's only mentioned one more time in the Hebrew Scriptures, Psalm 110, which becomes a very, very important messianic psalm. All that to say, Abraham gets blessed, delivers Lot. Now we come to chapter 15. After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abraham in a vision. There's two ways primarily the Lord comes to people. Actually, three. The Lord comes to his people in three ways. Here they are. Visions, in which you are awake and you see something. Dreams, in which you are asleep and see something in your dream. And then in appearances, where he actually manifests himself in a physical way right in front of you. Not in a vision type way, but where you can actually touch him. We'll see one of those in just a moment. But notice that it's the word of the Lord. The word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision saying, Do not be afraid, Abram, I am your shield, your exceedingly great reward. But Abram said, Lord God, what will you give me, seeing I go childless? Then Abram said, he says, Lord God, what will you give me? And he says, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus. Again, this is culturally bound. If Abraham dies without any heir, the head servant in his home will become the one who inherits everything by default. So he says, you've promised me children, and yet it's not going to happen. Not happening. All right. Now, Look at chapter 12. I mean, verse 12 of chapter 15. Now when the sun was going down, a deep sleep, same word used of Adam, a deep sleep fell upon him. Then he said to Avram, know certainly that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and will serve them, and they will afflict them 400 years. And also the nation whom they serve I will judge. Afterward they shall come out with great possessions. He's just foretold the fact that they're going to go into Egyptian captivity. That's coming down the pike. God knows about it already. Not going to surprise him. I'm skipping over. Chapter 16. Chapter 16, Sarai becomes pregnant. Hagar becomes pregnant and is now become loathsome to Sarai. Hagar is kicked out by Sarai. And look at this, verse 7 of chapter 16. I believe this is one of those appearances where you can actually touch them. And this is the Malach Adonai. This is the angel of the Lord. Now look at what he says. This is important. Verse 7, chapter 16. Now the angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, by the spring on the way to Shur. And he said, now this is the Malach Adonai, Hagar, how does he know who she is? And then he says, Sarai's maid. Wow. He knows where she's been. He knows her name or her designation. He knows where she's been. And he's never met her. He just shows up, this Malach Adonai, and he says to her, the angel of the Lord said to her, return to your mistress and submit yourself under her hand. Then the angel of the Lord said to her, I will multiply your descendants exceedingly, so that they shall not be counted for multitude. And the angel of the Lord said to her, and he goes on, the angel of the Lord promises her descendants. Well, hold on, who is this angel of the Lord? It's my belief that this angel of the Lord is El Elyon, Ha Elohim, Yod He Vav He, any of the designations you want to pick. That's who he is. He's come down. And this is the first time that we have recorded for us that this one has come down. This Malach Adonai. And if you trace the Malach Adonai all the way through the Hebrew Scriptures, you see a very, very, very interesting character who intersperses between Yod He Vav He all the time. So my point is this. If our Christology does not include the Malach Adonai, I think we have missed a great deal of understanding who he is. And he's able to promise Hagar that she will have children. And he knows her name. He knows where she's been. This is no ordinary Elohim, as if Elohim could be ordinary. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly, because he's the same one. He meets John 4, he meets this woman at the well. He says, of course you have no husband because you've had 5 husbands. And the one you're with now is not your husband. And she says, I think you may be a prophet. Huh, really? Perceptive lady, very perceptive. Or you work for the Inquirer, one of the two. But he says to her, you know what? I'll give you living water and you'll never thirst again. Well, that sounds awfully like this one who can promise, I'll give you a descendant. I'll make sure you have a descendant. How do you promise children? The only way you can promise children is if you're the one who gives children. So this angel of the Lord just says, Hagar, hello? I know you left Sarah's handmaid. I know where you've been. Now I want you to go back. Who's this angel of the Lord? All the way through the Scriptures, we see this one, and he is Yod He Vav He. He's used interchangeably with Yod He Vav He. And I believe that this angel of the Lord is Yeshua, which is exactly why he can say things like Torah and the prophets and the Psalms speak about me. John 5, he can say all of the Scriptures, Hebrew Scriptures, speak about me. It's all about me. there's a lot of debate as to who Melchizedek is with regards to divinity or identity in this concept. And I don't know. I'm not.
How could he be anything but?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure. I'm just saying I haven't nailed it down enough for me to know who Melchizedek is.
You can take his samples off.
Huh?
You can take his samples off.
Well, yeah, that's true. But I mean, I don't know. I'm just being honest with you to say I don't know. I'm open to ideas and open to discussion on it, but I just don't. I've not been able to definitively say, yeah, he's. I mean, I know he's. There's a lot of interesting things about him, and there's a lot of things about him that lead me in that direction. But I'm just not sure. But I do know the Malach Adonai is. That one I'm sure of.
Well, there's two kings. The king of righteousness and the king of peace.
Right. Yeah.
Which is actually associated with Yeshua.
Right. So I mean, like I said, I have my leanings, but I would like to nail it down a little bit more definitively. The Malach Adonai I can be much more definitive on. The other one I have a little bit of hesitancy before I commit to that. But I'm not against it, but I just don't know. Yeah. Yes, all over the place. Yeah, Dead Sea Scrolls, he's all over the place. Other intertestamental literature, he's all over the place. Yeah, he becomes quite prevalent in the Dead Sea Scroll intertestamental period. They like a couple of individuals, Enoch, because there's very little said. Okay, so Enoch becomes huge. Melchizedek becomes huge in the intertestamental period because they are these biblical figures who are on the stage for a very little amount of time and then they leave. So you can say a lot of things about them that we just don't have the ability to really verify. So it's that's right. Yeah, I mean, so it's yeah. I'm not there yet. I'm not saying I can't be convinced. I'm just saying that's not where I'm at yet. And that's okay. That's okay. I'm just yeah. Thank you. So I mean, it's one of those things that I'm open to. I don't know.
Because around that kind of stuff, if people says, we'd like to talk about the big things, you can really, the things.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it is big. So my point is this, though. We have the first time we ever encounter this Malach Adonai is with Hagar, the foreigner. That says something to me. The first time the angel of the Lord appears, he appears to a foreigner. So he's not afraid of interaction and promises to and dealing with those who are foreigners, which goes back to chapter 12 when he said, "In you all the families of the earth will be blessed." He's not just dealing with the nation of Israel. The work that God is doing goes beyond just the work with Israel. Israel is meant to be the conduit. Israel is meant to be the platter on which everything God has to give to mankind is served. But we don't worship the platter. We don't worship the conduit. We worship that which comes through it. Okay, so some people get hung up and say, well, we must worship the Jews. It's not about worshiping the Jewish people. We worship the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Okay? That's the key. And he's going to work through these people to achieve his means. And what I want us to see is when we come to Genesis 1, 2, and 3, that there is a cosmic, before we've ever gotten to Genesis 1, 2, and 3, there's been a cosmic battle that has ensued. And God is now saying, I'm going to create another race on earth, and I will work through these people to achieve my goals and my means. And it's because of that the evil ones in this upper echelon of the Elohim try to destroy all that he is, and to destroy humanity, and they eventually want to destroy him. When they're here on the earth, you ought to do this sometime. Every time Yeshua encounters a demonic force here on this earth, they recognize him for who he is. There's never any doubt in their mind as to his identity. And from my perspective, that goes back to this divine council. They recognize him from the divine council. They've been up here in these meetings. Now they've come down to the earth. but they're still subservient to him. He can cast them out. He says, I want you to leave this man. Almost 2,000 of them. They say, well, can we please go in the herd of swine over here? And he says, all right, fine. Herd of swine they go. They have to have a body. Now, when the angels, Malach, messengers, come here from Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, they take on appearance. They don't inhabit a body. Okay? So he's able to send them into this herd of swine, but without a body to inhabit. But they all recognize him. They all say, "You're the Holy One of Israel. We know who you are." And he just says to a couple of them, "Hey, keep it quiet. I'm not ready to reveal myself yet." Now go back to our Haftorah reading for just one moment. Last thing. Our second Haftorah reading was Isaiah chapter 40. And he says, I want to get to it here just a second. Let me find it here just a second. I will find it. Because I thought it was one of those things, again, we need to focus on. Here we go. Well, you can look at verse 28 of chapter 40. Have you not known, have you not heard, the everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the world or of the earth, neither faints nor is weary. His understanding is unsearchable. But I wanted to focus on where it mentions two in the text. Let me get my other. Left it over here. Well, thought it was in our Haftorah text where it was mentioning the. Oh, here it is, 16. Here's one of those texts. Here's one of those texts where you get binary, another one of those binary mentionings. 41:16. Here it is. Listen to this. He says, "You shall winnow them, and wind shall carry them away, and the whirlwind shall scatter them. You shall rejoice in the Lord, and glory in the Holy One of Israel." Binary. It's one of those things where, from the Jewish mind, they would say, well, that's just a way of repeating it. That's just kind of this way of repetition. But for those who are looking at this, you're kind of going, boy, if you really want to be strict monotheist, all the way through Isaiah, it gets really sloppy. If that's your goal, if you really want to just say there's one, so there's this one, and then there's kind of this other. Okay. Yeah, they don't want it in there. Well, they won't read it in the readings of the Haftorah portion. But all through Isaiah, you get these texts where they keep saying, "The Holy One of Israel and His Maker." And His Maker, and it's like, it's just this binary nature, binary language all the way through, and you're kind of going, my point is this, because I keep coming back to this question, and this is the fundamental question, how did monotheistic, one God Jews, that's the key, one God Jews, living in the first century, how did they come to the conclusion, as they looked at this man, Yeshua, that he could be Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh and be part of this divine identity? What did they see in him or hear in him, or what was it about? But they had to connect it not only with what he said and what he did, which they ultimately did do, but they had to think in terms of those criteria, all the criteria for who Yeshua is, based on the Hebrew Scriptures. So they have to come back to those Scriptures and say, we can see him from here. And they did that. And I'm saying it was these kinds of texts where they grappled with these things and were able to come to the conclusion, being Jewish monotheists, that this was one, that Yeshua was part of the divine identity. That he was part and parcel. He was this one come down, sent from God.
What's the word they use in Genesis when he says create them an hour?
Okay. Well, it's a plural. See, I take it. Now, here's my thing on that. This is where I'm at. Again, I'm going to give you two things on that. We talked a little bit about this last week. In our image, obviously plural. And by the way, Elohim is a plural. Okay? It's a grammatical plural, so you have to look at all the verbs and the nouns around it to see if it's talking about Ha Elohim, the Elohim, or other Elohim. So you should have no other Aker Elohim besides me in the Ten Commandments. No other Elohim. Okay? Now, to answer your question, let me say how to word it. There are other Elohim, but there's only one Ha Elohim. Restate your question for me so I can reformulate. Go ahead.
I was just trying to think in the Hebrew translation from whatever.
Oh, okay, yes. Hour. Because it is plural there. The hour is plural. And my point is that the thing is that I think that this goes back to the divine council. That he's going to make them in the image of the Elohim. But here's what does that mean? So I think it's divine council language, this hour. I personally don't see it at this point, although I have evangelical friends who differ with me. They see this hour image there as Trinitarian. I don't see any Trinitarian there personally at this point. Okay, but that's I can argue for that from other places, but my point is I think that what Genesis 1 is doing is talking about divine counsel. Okay? So Elohim is saying to this divine counsel, I'm going to make man in our image. But what does that mean? In the image, we could say in the image. For instance, you could say the word in. I could say this, there is water in this bottle. That's location. I can say, I work in medicine. That's what I do, right? So what does it mean when he says in the image? I think if you go back and look at that, he's talking about man's function, which is to be a image bearer, which means to bring about the rule of God in the world. Wherever man goes, he's to be the one who governs and rules as God wants him to do, with God's instruction. It's a function, not as if we have some physicality that makes us look like Elohim. I think it's talking about functionality. Okay? And here's why I say that. Because if you look at image bearing in the ancient Near East, again, I'm going cultural here. Image bearing in the ancient Near East, if a king sets up an image of himself somewhere, what he's saying is, I rule in this area. So ancient Near Eastern kings would go and set up an image of themselves somewhere and say, I'm putting up my image so that everybody knows I rule here. Okay? Well, God's saying, I want those who I've dispersed, I want you to disperse. What do they want to do? They want to stay together, the Tower of Babel. He says, I want you to multiply and fill the earth. Therefore, you'll spread my dominion, carrying with you my purpose, which is to rule and govern the earth the way it's supposed to be, as I tell you to. That's my take. But I mean, again, there's room for disagreement on that and room for debate. Yes? Go ahead. What?
Does that mean when you say image, like standing stones?
Yes. And you see the same thing in Daniel. What does the king do? Nebuchadnezzar sets up a statue of himself. It's an image of him to say, hey, I rule in this area. Yeah.
Okay, go back to basics for me a second here. So this divine counsel, am I safe in assuming that what you're saying is divine counsel is basically these angelic hosts, and we got good guys and we got bad guys?
Eventually, yep.
That's basically
Right.
what a divine counsel is.
Yes.
These created beings.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So you have they are called Elohim or B'nai Elohim. They're later broken down into categories of proximity to God, such as cherubim, seraphim, and those kind of things. And then later on, we also have a rebellion. We find them being judged. So we know that there's demonic forces, but they're Elohim as well. They're spirit beings. Their creation and their dwelling was in the heavens. And God would meet with them, him obviously being the one who leads them, and he would say to them, I want you to do this, I want you to do that, I'm sending you here, sending you there, I want you to govern this region and report back to me. So there would be all of this kind of dialogue going on, like we see in Job 1. A number of other places we see it as well, not just Job 1. There's a couple of other places. You have one in 2 Kings, I believe it is, where he says, who is going to go be a lying spirit in the mouth of this prophet? I need somebody to go and really sabotage this prophet. You know, and one of the Elohim says, I'll go and deal with that. And by the way, you get a little bit of picture of this, of the territorialness in the apostolic text where it says, I think it's where it says Michael tried to move across to get the body of Moses, and he was prevented by these other Elohim. And so there's some kind of battle going on up here where they're able to have this fight. Okay, so yeah.
And on a more personal level, where it says that we don't wrestle against
Exactly,
blood,
but against principalities. Exactly. That's why Paul can say. So what I'm trying to get us to think is that he says we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but against these principalities and spiritual wickedness in high places.
right, but they have to be embodied.
Yes.
So it seems like we're wrestling against flesh and blood.
Yes. But in fact, what we're not wrestling against flesh and blood when they inhabit a person and are able to move and use that person. Just like Satan used this nakash, whatever the nakash is. We translated snake. I'm not sure it was a snake. But he uses this nakash and speaks through it. By the way, then Ha Elohim, or Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, the angel of the Lord actually speaks through Balaam's donkey and uses this donkey, right? And Balaam finds himself having a conversation with a donkey. If you find yourself having a conversation with a donkey, you know, you've got problems. I'm just going to tell you, you're in problems. But the point is that God can use, these Elohim can use animals, they can use people, okay? So they have the ability to use those of us on this level. They have, because here's one of the reasons, they have uninhibited access to us. We don't have access to them.
But we overcome them by the Spirit.
Yes, as the Spirit of God dwells in us.
Right.
The Elohim of God dwells in us. And yes, that's where we have the ability to overcome them and resist them. Hold on. Yes, go ahead.
So, in regards to Genesis 1, where it says, let us make mankind in our image, who at the time is in this divine council?
At the time that this happens, what we know is that we have Elohim there. Whether or not there's been a rebellion yet or not, I don't even know yet at that point. But the point of the hour, the plural, is for him, he's sitting in this council and he says, I'm going to make man in our image, that is, to do the purposes of which the council is a part of, which is to govern the world, to govern the cosmos. So I don't know whether or not there's been a fall yet, so to speak, of the Elohim, or if they're all still on the same page at that point. I don't know. Time-wise, I just don't know.
In Ephesians, he says that, he did this, he created everything so that the manifold wisdom of God could be demonstrated to those principalities and powers.
Yes.
The why question, why do we have to go through it all?
Right.
So that love can be demonstrated.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, but what I want you to see is that all of what's happening down here has ramifications and implications for what's happening in the heavenly realm. It's not just, there's a spiritual battle and a spiritual echelon to this that we don't see. Okay, but it's present. And so I just want us to realize that they can come down, we can't go up. So my point is this too, one came down for us, to fight for us, and to allow us the ability to overcome them. And before he did that, before he sent his son that would then unleash the Ruach, the other thing he did was he kept you and I protected by this divine army of Elohim. He weaponized them and he mechanized them so that they would protect they would protect the people of God. And when Yeshua was on this earth, everywhere he goes, everywhere Yeshua goes, there are angelic forces that surround him. An army of these Elohim that are weaponized and mechanized who are with him. They are present and they are there with him from the birth all the way to the death. They're always at the ready. Okay? So, and they're with us as well. Yes. What I mean by that is that we know that they have swords that are flaming. So that I take that to be some kind of weapon. It's a weapon, it's a sword, it's called a sword. The captain of the army of hosts in Joshua 5 has one. The cherub at the entrance of the ark has one. When David meets the Malach Adonai in 2 Chronicles, he has a flaming sword. So they all have these swords, according to what the text tells us. And they're mechanized. By that I mean they can move because they're on chariots. You have the prophet in 2 Kings where he says, open his eyes and let him see. And he says, on the mountains around Israel, on the tops of the mountains again, on the tops of the mountains we have the chariots of fire that are all around the mountains. Right? He says, I'm not worried about what this army is going to do to us. We got the army of God with us. They can't touch us unless they let them. And I don't think anybody's getting through those guys. Now, he can't see it. The prophet knows it there and sees it. Some things are only perceived by spiritual perception, not by physical perception. And so he says, open his eyes that he may see this. And he opens his eyes and the guy's like, whoa, we got a whole army of chariots. They're mechanized. Ezekiel sees this wheel, this chariot come down. We see this on different occasions. We see this chariot appear. I think it appeared, the flame of fire and the cloud by day. Elijah, so there's other places where it shows up. And then it says things like in the Psalms, he's the rider of the clouds. He rides the clouds like a chariot. So when the clouds move, they cover physically this chariot moving. Okay, so they're mechanized and they're weaponized. They have the ability to move. It would be no good to have a stationary army. It really can't fight for you if you go in a place where you need them. And they have weapons. They have swords. Yes.
Can I make some how they fit in with what you're saying about the Elohim and the council?
Yeah.
I can understand. Okay, so the Jews have captured Jesus, and he says, for which of these do you stone me? And the Jews answered him, it is not for a good work that we stone you, but for blasphemy, because you, being a man, make yourself God. Jesus answered them, is it not written in your law, I said to you, you are gods. If he called them gods to whom the word of God came, and scripture cannot be broken, do you say of him whom the Father consecrated and sent into the world, you're blaspheming?
Are you in John 10?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so what you have is, that's a quote from what I just quoted earlier, which is Psalm 82. I said you are Elohim, which is divine council language. So he's saying, why are you getting onto me and saying I can't be Elohim when I told you that there were already, I called these Elohim, I called them gods who were in this divine council. In other words, you know that there are Elohim. So if they can be in charge of earth, in charge of the physicality of this earth, why are you surprised that we can come to this earth?
So he's not referring to the Jews freedom of the world is delivered?
No, I think he's referring to the divine council in Psalm 82 and Deuteronomy 32. Right. He can do that because the Psalms are Torah. The Psalms are Torah as well. They're Torah put to poetry.